So we're going to close off the 9th chapter of Eruvin in the 4th Mishnah. And then we're going to move on to the 10th chapter, which is really a summary, not just of the Mishnah of Eruvin, but of Shabbat overall. So we're going to move from the 9th to the 10th chapter. The 9th chapter closes with a discussion about public space in which spaces are enclosed on two sides, but are open on the other two sides. And we're going to look at the Mishnah in a minute, but just to get a sense as to what the Mishnah is talking about, I wanted you to have some photographs of the kind of spaces we're talking about. So, for example, we might have an alleyway or an underpass, which is open at the front and the back, but not at the two sides. Or we might have the bottom of a bridge, which is open at one end and at the other end, but not at the two sides. Or we might, for example, build a high upper story on top of two buildings with a gap in between, just as in the picture on the left-hand side and the top picture on the right-hand side. If we build a kind of bridge-like structure between two buildings, then we'll create underneath it a space which is open at the far end and open at the near end, but is closed off to the right and closed off to the left. These are all spaces, if you like, which have two walls, but they don't have three walls or four walls. And that's the question which the Mishnah is going to address. And actually, that is effectively the last Mishnah in the Masechet of the real Masechet of Eruvin. In other words, excluding the last chapter, which we'll deal with in the next few days. So the Mishnah begins, Haboneh aliyah al gavei shnei batim, someone who builds an upper room on top of two houses. So this is exactly the situation we've got on the top right corner here. Someone's built an upper space on top of two houses. And we need to understand, by the way, that there is empty space below it. There's empty space below it. So someone builds an upper room on top of two houses. Or, v'chein, so too, gesharim hamafushalim. Maybe there's a bridge which is open underneath. What's the halacha? Metaltalin tachtehen b'Shabbat. We can carry underneath them on Shabbat. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, the Chachamim osrin, and the sages prohibit. So Rabbi Yehuda seems to have an idea that this space underneath the bridge or underneath the high building is some kind of closed space, and you can carry within it on Shabbat, even though it looks to you and me just like an open space. And by the way, Chachamim Omrim, the sages don't agree. And along the same lines, Ve'od, Amar Rabbi Yehuda also said, you can also make an eruv for an alley which is open. And the sages don't agree. So these are two situations where Rabbi Yehuda rules one way and the sages rule the other way. But what is common to all these situations is that we have a space open on two sides and shut on two sides. And the Bartanura explains it very nicely in a sort of graphic kind of way. He says, they're on two sides of the public thoroughfare. Mutaltalin tachat aliyah, we can carry underneath the high building. Defiti kra mikanu mikan yored vesotem, because the mouth of the ceiling from each side descends and closes them off. Let's go back and have a look at the picture of this. Let's say the underpass under the bridge. So the Bartanura is saying that Rabbi Yehuda is saying, and the halacha, by the way, doesn't go according to Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbi Yehuda is saying, look, if I've got two sides, then from the point of view of the halachic reality, not the physical reality, but the halachic reality, I can say that the the front edge of the bridge just drops down to the ground, and the back end of the bridge drops down to the ground. And underneath that bridge, I've actually got 4 walls. And that means I can carry it in, I can make an Eruvin, and I can treat it like a closed-off public space, like a space with a fence around it. Even though in terms of real physical reality, it's only got 2 walls. So that's how the 9th chapter closes, and actually how the real Mishnah of Eruvin closes. And the Chachamim don't agree, by the way. And then the Mishnah goes on in the 10th chapter to discuss a series of situations in which we might be pressed to break Shabbat. The Mishnah goes back to talk about boundary situations where we might need to break Shabbat. And we're going to see in these Mishnayot that the rabbis effectively bend over backwards to make life easy for Jews who are trying to keep Shabbat, at least in certain circumstances. And the first circumstance the Mishnah is going to address is a question of whether we find something valuable outdoors on Shabbat. Can we rescue it? Because we can't carry it on Shabbat. So how are we going to rescue it if we can't carry it? Hamotzet tefillin, someone who finds tefillin, well, those are pretty valuable, right? You found a set of tefillin. Machnisan zug zug. You could bring him in 1 pair at a time. Well, you could probably wear, if it's 1 pair, right? You could probably wear a pair of tefillin and then walk them inside, inside a courtyard or inside a house. And Rabban Gamliel says, Shnaim, Shnaim. You could actually put on 2, if you sort of pushed yourself, right? You could probably put on 2 sets of tefillin. You could put 1 on each arm and you can shove 2 on your head. You can actually walk 2. And remember, when we were learning about saving materials from a house that was burning down on Shabbat, remember the Mishnah taught that you could put on as many clothes as you could get on and then rush out of the burning building. And perhaps you could even get your friends to come back and get more. So putting on 2 sets of tefillin is a bit like putting on 2 coats. And then the Mishnah asks, what are we talking about? What kind of tefillin are we talking about? And it makes the qualification be shanot, with old tefillin. This seems to refer to tefillin that we know are kosher. Someone's using them, right? So we know that they're kosher tefillin. Aval, b'chadashot patur. But in the case of new ones, he's exempt. We're not going to do this in the case of new ones, because in the case of new ones, well, we don't really know whether these are kosher tefillin or not, so we might just leave them. Mitza'an, tzvatin, or krichot. If he found them arranged in a set or in bundles, so this is a massive tefillin. This must be the secret stash of some sofer. He's found them arranged in a set or in bundles. What does he do? He even taking 2 at a time. He's not going to bring them to safety. Machshich alehen. He waits for dark next to them. Umevian, and then he brings them in after dark. So he guards them basically. Uva sakana, at a time of danger. This might explain, by the way, why someone has stashed a whole bunch of tefillin somewhere outdoor in some weird place. Maybe in times of danger, maybe you can't just keep the tefillin in your house. Uva sakana, at times of danger, mechassan beholechlo. He should just cover them up and walk away. What if you had a friend? What if you had a friend to help you? Rabbi Shimon Omer, not nim lechavero. Rabbi Shimon says you should pass them. This is the tefillin, right? Pass them to your friend. This is presumably inside 4 amot, so you're not carrying in the public domain. Noten lechavero, pass them to your friend. V'chavero lechavero, and his friend to his friend. Ad shemagia lechatzar hachitzona, until you get to the outermost courtyard. In fact, you only need 1 friend, because as soon as you've passed it to your friend, 4 amot away, you can run round and stand 4 amot on the other side of him and take him again. So actually, with 2 people, you can pass them from one person to the other right the way till you get to your house. And Rabbi Yudah says, "Noten adam chaviv lechavero." V'chein b'no, and similarly for his child. Now, the Gemara here refers to a child that's actually born outside in the field, and I find this an absolutely extraordinary thought. But the Gemara is clear that we're talking about a newborn child here. I find it difficult to understand, but I'm just passing that sort of that thought on as I absorbed it. V'chein b'no, and similarly for his child, this is a baby who can't walk, right? He passed him to his friend, and his friend to his friend. Even if there's 100, if you could have 100 people passing from this child from one to the other, I do not understand this Mishnah, because there must be a case of pikuach nefesh in the case of a newborn child. But this is the words of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and maybe this is where it gets important. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, noten adam chavit lachalaro. So Rabbi Yehuda says, look, you might have a jar with something that you needed to transport on Shabbat, and you could give it to your friend and your friend to his friend. You could treat a jar the same way. Afilu chutz latchum, even outside the Shabbat limit. And the sages are going to at least restrict this. Amrulo, the sages say, Lo talech zo yoter miragleva aleha. The jar can't go further than the feet of its owner. As if to say, well, look, we know that the owner certainly can't go outside the Shabbat limit. The owner certainly can't go further than 2,000 amot outside town. So you certainly cannot carry a jar more than 2,000 amot outside town in that way.